If you spend 5 minutes anywhere on the internet, the indictment against South Asians in the UK is pretty consistent. They tell us the country is being invaded by people who treat the law like a suggestion box. They say these people are scammers, predators and economic leeches, sucking the marrow out of the welfare state. It's a compelling story, and it relies on a very simple, very comfortable premise. They are doing something to us that we would never do. But if you actually crack open the archives of the British Empire and blow off the dust of a few centuries of propaganda, you realise these aren't new observations. They're memories. Every specific slur thrown at Indians, Pakistanis and Bangladeshis today is just high definition psychological projection. Every accusation is a confession. So sit back and let's go through the charge sheet.
We're being invaded.
Britain is being invaded.
Let's talk about the original boat people, the East India Company. But unlike the desperate souls on rubber dinghies today, the British turned up with gunboats. It didn't start that way. Initially, they arrived with begging bowls. When William Hawkins, one of the first Brits, showed up attempting to establish influence in India, the Mughals looked at him and basically said, cute, but no. They dismissed him as a plaything. Later, Sir Thomas Roe tried to impress the emperor with a diplomatic gift, a painting of a horse-drawn carriage. The emperor literally laughed in his face. He thought it was so tatty and garbage that he had it destroyed and ordered his own artist to paint a better one, just to show the British how it was done. But the begging soon stopped. The British realised they couldn't compete on culture and they certainly couldn't compete on trade. So they switched to the one thing they were genuinely world class at: violence. They built illegal forts, they bribed governors, and then they did something no modern immigrant has ever done. They built a private mercenary army. By the early 1800s, this private corporation had a standing army of 260,000 men. That was twice the size of the British Army. By 1847, they had annexed 250,000 square miles and controlled the lives of 200 million people. And then they took over state tax collection. The modern day equivalent of Jeff Bezos showing up at your front door with a tank demanding your income tax on behalf of the state. As the Mughal official Narayan Singh put it, what honour is left to us when we have to take orders from a handful of traders who have not yet learned to wash their bottoms? They still haven't, my friend.
Like someone's trying to destroy England.
They want to destroy Britain.
The looting of India started in the mid-18th century and didn't stop for 200 years. They even stole the word loot from Hindi. Take Robert Clive of India, to his mates. In 1757, after winning the Battle of Plassey, he didn't just win, he emptied the cash register. He personally pocketed £40 million in today's money. He went back to England, bought a seat in Parliament and bought a massive estate. And what did he have to say about this? He marvelled at his own self-restraint. When I think of the marvellous riches of that country and the comparatively small part which I took away, I am astonished at my own moderation. What a guy. Truly humble. Let's look at the stats, because numbers don't have feelings. In the year 1 CE, India accounted for 33% of global GDP. The UK, France and Germany combined, barely 3%. In the year 1700, India is at about 25% global GDP. The European powers combined are at about 11%. By the time colonialism ended in the 1950s, and after the British finally packed their bags, India had crashed to 4%. India went from being a global superpower to a third world country, purely thanks to British management. Even Thomas Macaulay, a man who usually loved the sound of his own voice praising Britain, had to admit the servants of the company, i.e. the East India Company, forced the natives to buy dear and sell cheap. 30 millions of human beings were reduced to the extremity of wretchedness. Thomas Pitt built a political dynasty that produced 2 prime ministers entirely on stolen Indian diamonds. One stone alone sold for £135,000. That's multi-millions today. Economist Utsa Patnaik ran the numbers. She calculated the total drain at $44.6 trillion in modern money. To put that into perspective, if you stack £10 notes on top of each other, the pile would reach the moon before you reach the amount Britain stole.
I can't get a job. They come to this country and they just get a job just like that.
So when you apply, what do they say to you?
Well, I've got a criminal record.
They're taking all our jobs.
What qualifications do you have?
None, they're taking all the qualifications as well.
Before the Raj, India was a textile workshop of the world. They were exporting top-tier silk to everyone from Rome to Japan. The British textile industry simply couldn't compete. Their stuff was overpriced and, well, just crap. So, the British decided to let the free market decide. By which I mean, they rigged the game. Step 1. Banned Indian exports to anyone but Britain. Step 2. Slap 70 to 80% tariffs on Indian cloth sold to the UK. And step 3, flood India with British cloth duty-free. The result? Dhaka, the world capital of muslin, saw its population crash from hundreds of thousands to just 50,000 by the 1820s. India went from holding 25% of the global textile trade to 2%. They didn't just take jobs away, they deleted an entire industry.
Today, another Pakistan gang was convicted. 7 men, there they are, 7 men have been found guilty of grooming abuse offences.
If you want to see a system of organised state-sponsored predation, look no further than the Cantonment Act of 1864. The British Army in India had a problem. Their lads couldn't keep their hands off the locals. 1 in 3 soldiers had a venereal disease. That's an STI. Rather than, disciplining the men, the government decided to provide them with women. They set up chaklas, essentially regimented brothels inside military bases. The quota was very strict, roughly 15 Indian women for every 1,000 British soldiers. These weren't willing participants. These were the poor, the starving, the victims of British-made famine. Once a woman entered a chakla, she was issued a registration ticket. This legally branded her as a common prostitute, guaranteeing she could never return to her normal life. She was trapped. Under the Contagious Disease Act, these women were forced to undergo invasive weekly medical exams to ensure the British men and the British boys remained in rude health. The modern far right complains about secret grooming gangs. The British Empire ran a sex trafficking ring by royal decree. The British invented the protection racket long before the mob. Look at Hyderabad. The ruling Nizam was forced to pay the British protection money to keep his throne. When he couldn't pay, they charged him 24% interest. When he still couldn't pay, they seized his land. As for drugs, the British Empire was the largest narco state in history. In 1833, Lord Macaulay told Parliament that opium was a detestable artifice that turned men into idiots. Yet, at that exact moment, the East India Company was forcing Indian farmers to destroy food crops to grow opium. They processed it on an industrial scale and smuggled it into China. When China said, "Please stop drugging our people," Britain declared war. They bombed Chinese ports to force them to accept the drugs. So when they talk about drug gangs today, remember, the biggest cartel in history was run from Whitehall.
£183 million is the amount of money that's been made in the past year alone by people traffickers. Absolutely incredible number.
In 1833, Britain abolished slavery. there was a small problem. The plantation still needed cheap labour, so they came up with an ingenious rebrand. They called it the Indentured labour system. Same product, different packaging. To fill the ships, they used recruiters called rackets. These weren't employment agents, they were kidnappers. They roamed famine-struck villages promising food. Illiterate villagers signed 5-year contracts with thumbprints, not realising they were signing away their freedom. They were packed onto ships where mortality rates reached 17%, rivaling the transatlantic slave trade. Between 1834 and 1917, Britain trafficked 1.3 million Indians to Fiji, the Caribbean, and Mauritius. When the system was briefly banned in 1838 due to horrific abuse, plantation owners lobbied the government because, well, they missed their nearly free labour. The ban was overturned in 1842. The original smuggling gangs were government contractors. The British were so obsessed with the idea that Indians were lazy that they let them starve to death to teach them a lesson. Between 30 and 50 million Indians died of famine under British rule. To put that into context, Stalin killed 6 to 9 million, Mao 30 to 45 million, the British Empire up to 50 million. They are right up there on the leaderboard of mass death and mass killers. In the Orissa famine of 1866 alone, 1 million people died, yet at the same time, Britain was exporting over £200 million of rice to the UK. Why? Because free market ideology was more important than human life. In the Bengal Famine of 1943, 3 million died. Churchill diverted Indian grain to the war effort to stockpile. When asked why, he blamed Indians for breeding like rabbits, and even asked why hasn't Gandhi died yet. They even calculated the cruelty. Sir Richard Temple invented the Temple wage, a ration for relief camp that provided fewer calories than the inmates of the Buchenwald concentration camp received. Just to be clear, before the British arrived, India had never suffered a famine on this scale. The empire was the parasite that fed on the grain while the Indians starved.
Migrants in the UK sent a jaw-dropping $9.3 billion back home last year. Pakistan was second, receiving $294 billion. India topped the list with a staggering $446 billion.
It's ironic to complain about immigrants sending wages home when the British Empire spent 200 years sending Indian taxes home. It was official policy known as the home charges. The East India Company extracted approximately £18 million a year from India to pay for pensions and fancy offices in London. Will Durant visited India in 1930 and saw how this money was collected. Tax defaulters were confined in cages and exposed to the burning sun. Fathers sold their children to meet the rising rates. So, when a worker sends £100 back to his family today, remember, he earned that. The British Empire paid its bills through the sale of children. When you see the far right pitting communities against each other, telling the Indian he is a model minority and the Pakistani that he is a threat, remember that this too is a colonial relic. They classified you as martial races or as seditious races just to make you easier to rule. The accusations they throw today, invader, thief, scammer, groomer, parasite, are not descriptions of you, they are descriptions of them. And always remember, every accusation is a confession.